Who did that to your hands? Nobody you'd know. That is not an answer. That is a wall. I build those too. Then let me keep this one. A woman washes dishes 6 nights a week in a kitchen that never pays her in full, and she hides her hands from everyone who might ask. A man who owns half the private card rooms in Daegu walks into that kitchen for reasons no one can explain, and he asks the one question she has spent years dodging. Between them stands the owner who keeps his staff too broke to complain, and a pattern of accidents that only one person in the building has the mind to solve. What happens when the most underestimated woman in the room turns out to be the only one who can read the whole board? Stay with this one, because a quiet question over a sink full of scalding water is only the beginning, and this story does not end the way you think it will. If a stranger asked what your hands had survived, would you tell them the truth, or would you keep the wall? Tell me in the comments before we start. Her name was Nia Parker, and she had turned down MIT. She was 36 years old, and almost no one in Daegu knew that number carried a scholarship offer she had folded up and mailed back at 18 because her father's lungs were failing in a garden apartment in North St. Louis County, in the shadow of the shipyard that had taken them. Numbers came to her the way breath came to other people. She did the taxes for every server on her shift for free, in the margins of order slips, in her head while the water ran. She could tell you the odds of anything. What she could not tell you was why, on a Tuesday in October, on the 30th floor of a soundstage she had no business being inside, a man exactly 28 years old stood 3 feet away and looked at her ruined hands like they were the only true thing he had seen in months. He did not look away. That was the first strange thing. 3 weeks earlier, the water in the dish pit ran at 71 degrees Celsius, and Nia Parker knew the exact number because she had once asked, and because a number was easier to hold than the feeling of it. She was 36 years old. She stood 5'7" in the flat shoes she wore because the floor of the Warren room stayed wet from 6 in the evening until close. And she had learned that heels and standing water were a wager she could not afford to lose. She had come to Daegu the way a lot of people came to a place they had never planned to stay, following work that had thinned out and then vanished, and she had found the only door that opened. By day, she was a home hospice aide. She sat with the dying. She turned bodies that had stopped being able to turn themselves. She read aloud when the eyes could no longer track the page. She held the hands of strangers through the last hours their families could not bear to sit through. She was good at it in a way that had nothing to do with training and everything to do with a stillness she had carried since North St. Louis County. Since a garden apartment where the air itself had been hard to breathe. By night, she washed dishes. 6 nights a week, she stood at the pit in the back of the Warren room and scrubbed the grease off other people's evenings for wages that never arrived whole. Something was always taken out. A broken glass she had not broken. A chipped plate that had come to her already chipped. A late clock-in on a night she had been early. The math of it was always slightly wrong, and Nia, of all the people in that kitchen, was the one person alive who could feel exactly how wrong. She never said so. That was the part the others did not understand. The water did the damage that everyone eventually noticed, and no one ever named. It scalded the skin across her knuckles until it cracked, and the cracking healed rough, and the rough cracked again. Her hands looked 10 years older than her face. They looked like something that had happened to her rather than something she was. So she kept them out of sight, long sleeves pulled to the base of her thumbs, gloves on the train. Her palms turned down on any table she sat at, as if she were always about to push herself up and leave. She had a way of making herself unremarkable that took real skill to maintain. The girls on the floor loved her for the taxes. That was the open secret of the Warren room, the thing the staff traded like a password. Bring Nia your papers, the mess of forms and receipts and the letters no one could read, and she would sort it in her head faster than the accountants the owner paid. She did it in the margins of order slips while the water ran. She did it standing up, on her break, with a pen that barely worked. She never charged a won. A server named Da-un had gotten back 400,000 won she did not know she was owed, and had cried in the walk-in cooler, and Nia had pretended not to see. Numbers came to her the way breath came to other people. They always had. At 18, she had held an envelope from MIT with a full scholarship inside it, and she had folded that envelope into thirds and mailed it back, because her father's lungs were failing and there was no one else. And some choices do not feel like choices at all when you are standing inside them. She did not talk about that. She did not talk about most things. She had learned young that the fastest way to keep a thing safe was to let people assume it did not exist. So the Warren room believed she was a dishwasher who was decent with numbers, and that suited her fine. Owen Warren owned the place. He was American, from somewhere he described differently depending on who was impressed by what. And he had built 3 restaurants in Daegu on a single principle he would never have said out loud, but ran like a machine. Hire the people who cannot complain. Hire the ones whose visas are shaky, whose savings are gone, whose families are an ocean away, and one missed payment from crisis. Pay them almost enough. Take back the almost. He was pleasant about it, mostly. That was what made it work. He learned first names and used them warmly. He remembered a sick mother, asked after her, docked the pay in the same breath. He had a gift for making cruelty sound like a favor he was doing you. The dish pit was where he sent people who had displeased him. Everyone knew this. A server who talked back got put on dishes for a week. A cook who questioned a schedule found himself scrubbing pots until 2 a.m. The pit was the punishment station, the corner of the kitchen where the water ran too hot and the pay ran too short, and Owen let it be known that this was where you went to think about your choices. Nia had been on the pit for 14 months. She had never displeased him. That was the thing she understood, and no one else did. He kept her there, not as punishment, but because she was the best worker he had, the one who never called out, never argued, never let a rush overwhelm the station. A worker that good in a place that unpleasant was worth more to him unpaid than paid. Every one he clawed back from Nia was a one he kept, and she never fought for it, and so she was the perfect victim, the model of what he wanted the whole staff to become. He mistook her silence for weakness. Most people did. That was the single most expensive mistake a person could make about Nia Parker, and no one had made it yet in a way that mattered. On the Tuesday, everything began to turn. The Warren room was not the Warren room. Owen had booked the kitchen out for a private event 30 floors up, in a soundstage his newest partner had leased for something to do with a broadcast, a card room built for cameras, a thing Nia only half understood. The staff had been bussed up in 2 elevators. The dishes came down a service line from a temporary bar, and Nia stood at a borrowed sink in a borrowed corner, 30 floors above a city she had not chosen, doing the one thing she always did. The men who came through that night were not restaurant men. She could tell by the shoes. She had a habit of reading people from the ground up, a thing she had never decided to do, and the shoes told her these were men who were driven places. Men who did not stand in wet kitchens. Men whose money did not come from food. One of them stopped at her sink. He was young. That was the first thing, and it surprised her, because everything about the way the room had rearranged itself around him said he was the reason the room existed, and reasons like that were usually older. He was exactly 28 years old, though she would not learn the number for some time yet. He wore no jewelry. He carried nothing in his hands. He had the stillness of a man who had never once in his life needed to hurry, and Nia, who had made a study of stillness, recognized a version of her own. He watched her work for 11 seconds before he said anything. She counted. She counted things when she was nervous, and she was nervous, though her hands did not change their rhythm, and her face gave away nothing at all. "You dry the glasses before the plates," he said. His English was careful and exact, the English of a man who had chosen every word he owned. Everyone else does it the other way. "Glasses cool faster," she said. "Plates hold the heat. You wait on the plates, you save your hands." She heard the mistake the moment it left her mouth. Not the logic. The word. Hands. He looked at them then. She had her sleeves down, her wrists turned in, everything arranged the way it always was, and still he looked, and still he saw. She watched his eyes move across the cracked skin above her gloves, the rough seams where the scalding had healed wrong, the whole ruined map of 14 months. He did not flinch. He did not soften his face into pity, which she would have hated. He simply read her hands the way she read shoes, from the evidence up, and arrived somewhere she had not given him permission to go. "How long have you been on that sink?" he said. It was not really a question. He had already decided the answer. "Long enough." "Who put you there?" She almost smiled. Almost. "Nobody who'd tell you the truth if you asked." Something moved behind his eyes. Not anger. Anger was loud, and this was not loud. It was the look of a man filing something away in a place he did not intend to lose it from. And Nia, who had spent her life being the person who noticed, and never the person noticed, felt the strange discomfort of being read as accurately as she read everyone else. Owen found them then. He came across the floor fast, the warm smile already fixed, the smile he used when a customer had wandered somewhere a customer should not be. He did not yet understand who he was walking toward. Nia watched him fail to understand it in real time, watched him aim his host voice at the most dangerous man in the room as if he were shooing a guest away from the kitchen. "Mr. Guion," Owen said, and there was the first small crack, because he did know the name, he had booked the room, and the knowing and the shooing did not fit together. "I apologize. My staff should not be in the guest sightlines. She'll be moved." "She's not in my sightline," the man said. "She's in my conversation." Owen laughed the way men laugh when they have not been told the joke. "Of course. She's one of my best. A little slow with the breakage this month, but we're working on it." Nia kept her eyes on the water. She knew this move. The public dock. The little insult delivered as fondness, meant to remind her, in front of anyone, that her wages lived in his hand and he could close it whenever he liked. He did it to keep her small. He had done it 100 times and it had always worked, because there had never been anyone in the room worth performing dignity for. There was tonight. Hyung-won-gyeon turned his head slowly and looked at Owen for the first time the way he had looked at her hands. Ground up. Evidence first. Nia saw the exact second Owen felt it, felt himself being read, felt the floor of the conversation tilt without a single voice being raised. "What is her rate?" Hyung-won said. "I'm sorry?" "Her hourly rate. You said she was slow with the breakage, so you dock her. From what number?" Owen's smile held, but the muscles under it had started to work. "That's really an internal matter." "Everything is internal until someone asks," Hyung-won said. He was so quiet that Nia had to stop the water to hear him, and she did stop it, and the sudden silence in that corner of the soundstage was its own kind of announcement. "I asked." For a moment no one said anything. 30 floors down, the city ran its lights. Up here, 3 people stood around a borrowed sink, and the balance of power in the room shifted by an amount none of them could have measured, though one of them could feel it move. Owen recovered the way his kind always recovered. "I'll have her wrap up," he said, warm again, already stepping back into charm. "You shouldn't have to look at that." He meant her hands. He said it lightly, the way he said everything, and he walked off before he could see it land. Certain he had won, because he always won. Because the woman at the sink had never once in 14 months given him a reason to think otherwise. Nia turned the water back on. Her rhythm did not break. But her chest was doing something it had not done in a long time, something she did not have a clean number for, and she hated that a little, the imprecision of it. The young man did not leave with the owner. He stayed exactly where he was, 3 feet from her, and waited until the water had covered them both again before he spoke. "He is wrong about one thing," he said. "I could look at your hands all night." She did not answer that. There was no answer that would not cost her something, and Nia had spent a lifetime keeping her costs low. He left a minute later. No number exchanged, no name asked of her, nothing she could have pointed to as a beginning. He simply set 2 fingertips on the steel lip of the sink, the way a man tests whether a surface is cold, and then he was gone into the part of the soundstage where the cameras were, and Nia washed the last of the borrowed glasses and rode the service elevator down 30 floors with the other staff, saying nothing, her hands in her sleeves. The others talked the whole way down. She listened the way she always listened, which was completely. Someone said the young man owned card rooms. Someone said half the private tables in Daegu ran on his money. Someone said his family did not lend the way banks lend, and let the sentence finish itself, and everyone in the elevator understood the shape of what was not said. Nia held it against the other thing she knew, which was that Owen Warren had leased that soundstage from this man's newest partner, that Owen had wanted very badly to look like a peer up there, and that Owen had walked away from the sink certain he had. He had not. Nia had watched him lose without knowing he was in a game. She went home to a room she paid too much for and sat on the edge of the bed with her gloves still on, and she did the thing she did when she could not sleep. She ran the numbers on her own life. 14 months, 6 nights a week. The docks, the breakages she had not broken, the late clock-ins invented out of nothing. She had never let herself add it up before, because the sum was a wall and she built those. But that night she added it up, and the figure sat in the dark in front of her, and it was larger than she had allowed herself to believe. She fell asleep before she decided what to do with it. The next week, Owen changed the schedule. He did it the way he did everything, warmly, in passing, as if it were a kindness. He caught her by the walk-in as she clocked in and told her the pit was hers alone now. No rotation. The one girl who had shared it with her on the heavy nights was being moved to the floor, he said, because Nia was simply so much better at it, and it would be a waste to split the station. He smiled when he said waste. He touched her shoulder, once, the way a man touches a thing he owns to remind it who owns it. Nia understood exactly what had happened. He had felt the floor tilt in that soundstage, and he could not reach the man who tilted it, and so he was reaching for her. The pit alone, 6 nights a week, was not a job. It was a punishment dressed as a promotion. Twice the load, the same short pay, and no witness in the corner with her anymore who might one day say what she would never say herself. He was isolating her. She had watched him do it to others, and now he was doing it to her. And the only new thing was that he was doing it because a stranger had looked at her hands. She said thank you. That was the part the others would never have understood. She said thank you, and she meant it the way you mean a word you are using as a shield, and she went to the pit and worked it alone and let the water do what the water did. The cracks along her knuckles opened again by Thursday. She wrapped them in the cheap tape they used for the walk-in shelving and pulled her sleeves down and told no one. She thought that would be the end of the young man. Men like that passed through a night and did not come back to it. She had decided this cleanly, the way she decided most things, and it steadied her. And then on the following Tuesday, she came up the service line with a rack of glasses, and he was standing in the empty soundstage as if the 8 days between had not happened. There was no event. The cameras were dark. The card table sat under a dust sheet. He was simply there, in the vast dim room 30 floors up, and when she came through the service door with her rack, he did not look surprised, which meant he had known which door and which night, which meant he had asked someone, in Nia's mind, which never stopped, filed that with the shoes and the stillness and the fingertips on the steel. There's no service tonight, she said. No. Then there's nothing to wash. No, he said again. He was near the windows, and the city was behind him, 40,000 lights she did not count. I pay for the room by the month. I use it when it is empty. It is the only room in Daegu where no one writes down what is said. She did not know what to do with that, so she set the rack down and stood with the table between them. You changed your hours, he said. How would you know that? I asked how you were doing. The answer told me more than the person meant to say. He let that sit. You have the whole pit now, alone. 8 days after a man you have never met asked your owner what your rate was. Nia kept her face still. That's a coincidence. You do not believe in those. Neither do I. It is the one thing I could tell about you in 11 seconds. A pause, the length of which she felt in her chest. He moved the other woman off your station so there would be no one standing next to you the next time someone asks a question. That is not scheduling. That is a man removing a witness. She had thought the same thing in nearly the same words, alone, in the dark, and hearing it in another mouth was a violation and a relief at once, and she did not have a number for the ratio between the two. Why do you care? She said. It came out harder than she meant it. You own card rooms. I wash dishes. There's no version of this where you're bored enough for it to be real. He was quiet for a while. When powerful men went quiet, Nia had learned, it was usually a tactic. This did not feel like a tactic. I spent my whole life, he said slowly, being handed pages I was supposed to read in front of people and finding a way to answer without reading them. I learned to listen instead, to count instead, to hold a thing in my head because the paper was a wall I could not climb. He looked at her hands briefly, then back to her face, giving her the dignity of the second look. I know what it costs to build a wall that keeps a thing safe. I know what it costs to let everyone believe the safe thing does not exist. I saw you do it in one sentence about drying glasses, and I have not been able to stop thinking about the size of what you are hiding. Nia said nothing. There was a great deal she could have said, and she said none of it, and the silence between them was not empty. It was the most full silence she had stood inside in years. I'm not going to ask you again about your hands, he said. You told me to keep the wall. I will keep it. He picked up the edge of the dust sheet on the card table, straightened it, an oddly domestic gesture from a man they said the banks were afraid of. But I'm going to tell you one thing, and then you can go back down. The man who owns your nights is not as safe as he believes he is. He has partners now. Partners have expectations. When a man like that starts to feel the ground move, he does not get careful. He gets loud. He looks for someone smaller to stand on, so the people watching see him as tall. And you think that's me. I think you have been the thing he stands on for 14 months, Hyungwon said. I think what is coming will be worse, because now he has an audience he is afraid of, and afraid men perform. He set the sheet down. Watch for cameras, that is all. When his kind decides to make an example of someone, they like it seen. She wrote back down with that sentence sitting in her like a swallowed stone. Watch for cameras. She did not know yet what it meant. She only knew he had said it the way he said everything, quietly, as a fact he had already checked twice, and that a man who owned half the card rooms in the city did not waste breath on warnings he had not priced. The escalation came the way he said it would, but faster. Owen's newest partner, it turned out, was in the business of broadcast. There was to be a night in the soundstage, a real one, cameras live, a card room dressed for an audience, a thing the partner called content and Owen called opportunity. Owen wanted his restaurants attached to it. He wanted to be the man who catered the tables of the men the city feared, and he told the whole staff about it at a Monday meeting with the warmth of a man announcing good news, and he told them the standard would be perfect. And he looked at Nia when he said perfect, and everyone in the room understood the sentence had an address. The breakage docs doubled that week. Glasses she never touched appeared on her sheet. A whole rack, he said, cracked in the machine on her shift, 90,000 won, gone. She had run that machine for 14 months, and it had never cracked a rack. And she did the arithmetic in her head while he read the number to her, and the arithmetic said he was inventing losses now faster than the pit could plausibly produce them. He was building a paper story. Nia saw it, because paper stories were made of numbers, and numbers were the one language no one could hide from her. On the page, she was becoming a careless worker, a source of breakage, a liability. Line by line, doc by doc, Owen was writing a version of her that would justify whatever he had already decided to do. She kept the sheets. That was new. For 14 months, she had let the docs disappear because fighting them cost more than they took. Now, each night, she copied the day's figures onto the back of an order slip in her small exact hand, the false breakages and the real hours, and she folded the slips into the lining of her coat, and she said nothing, and she watched for cameras. Daegu found her in the walk-in on the Thursday, the way people found her when they were afraid. The girl was shaking. Owen had told her that night that the 400,000 won she had recovered, the money Nia had found for her months ago, had triggered a review, that the restaurant might have to correct it, that she might owe it back. It was a lie, and Nia knew it was a lie the moment she heard it, because there was no mechanism by which it could be true. But Daegu did not have the mind to see that, and Owen knew she did not, and he had chosen her on purpose, because hurting the girl was a way of reaching Nia through a wall he could not otherwise climb. "He said your name," Daegu whispered. "He said you're the one who put ideas in people's heads. He said after the broadcast night, things are going to be different for you." Nia held the girl's hands, her own ruined ones bare for once, because in the walk-in there was no one to hide them from, and she felt the cold coil off the shelves and settle on the tape across her knuckles. "Different how?" she said. "He didn't say, but there was a man with him, not a customer. He had a camera bag, and he kept looking at the pit through the pass." Owen laughed and said, "That one. That's the story. Watch for cameras." The stone in Nia's chest turned over. She did not let the girl see it move. She told Daegu the money was safe, that no review could take back a correction already filed, that it was not possible, and she would show her the rule in writing if she wanted. And she watched the fear drain out of the girl by degrees, and she meant every word because every word was true. But under the calm she was doing the harder math, the math of her own position, and it was not good. She was alone on a station designed as punishment. Her pay had become a work of fiction, written to make her look careless. Her one friend in the building had just been used as a threat delivery. And somewhere in Owen's plan, there was a man with a camera bag who had looked at her sink and been told, "That one. That's the story." She understood then, standing in the cold, that Owen was not going to simply fire her. Firing was quiet, and Owen no longer wanted quiet. He had partners to impress and ground moving under him, and a broadcast full of powerful men who had watched a stranger tilt his floor without raising a voice. He needed to be seen standing on someone. He needed the city to watch him be the kind of man who could not be embarrassed in his own kitchen, and he had chosen the woman who had never once fought back, because she was safe, because she was small, because in 14 months she had given him no reason to imagine she was anything else. He had mistaken her silence for weakness. He was about to make that mistake in front of cameras. Nia went back to the pit and turned on the water and let it run to 71 degrees, and she washed the glasses in the order that saved her hands, and she thought about the man 30 floors up who had told her to watch, and she thought about the slips folded into the lining of her coat. And for the first time in 14 months, she let herself add a second column to the arithmetic. Not just what he had taken, what it would cost him, when someone finally counted it out loud. The broadcast night arrived on a Tuesday because Owen liked patterns even when he did not understand them. The soundstage had been dressed like a room that had always existed. Green felt under warm lamps. A bar built for the cameras. A press riser along the far wall where the partners' people had arranged for coverage. A live stream feed running to whatever audience paid attention to men pretending to be dangerous for a lens. Nia came up the service line with the rest of the staff and saw the riser and understood that the story was about to be told, and that she was meant to be in it, and that she was meant to lose. Owen had placed the pit in the sightline this time, not hidden in a borrowed corner. set where the cameras could find it. A woman in wet sleeves scrubbing at the edge of the frame. The human cost he could point to and joke about. The small thing he would stand on to look tall. She saw the man with the camera bag. He was already aimed at her. Owen worked the room for an hour with his host voice. Then, when the feed was live, and the powerful men were seated, and the partner had given him the nod, he brought the camera to the pit himself, warm and loud, a tour of his own operation. "And this," he said, "is where the magic gets cleaned up. This is Nia, our hardest worker, when she's not costing me a fortune in breakage. 90,000 won this week alone." "Show them the hands, Nia. Show them what a real night's work looks like." It was the cruelty he had rehearsed. Expose her hands on a live stream, name her as a liability, let the room laugh, let the city watch him be a man who could not be embarrassed in his own kitchen. He waited for her to shrink. 14 months had taught him she would shrink. Nia turned off the water. The silence did the thing it had done in the empty soundstage 8 days into this. It announced her. "You said 90,000 won," she said. Her voice was not loud. She had learned from watching the quietest man in every room. "For a rack that cracked in the machine on my shift, I'd like to talk about that number since the cameras are here for numbers." Owen laughed for the feed. "She does everyone's taxes. Little hobby of hers." "The machine has run 14 months without cracking a rack," Nia said. "But that's not the interesting part. The interesting part is the pattern." She reached into the lining of her coat and drew out the folded slips, her small exact hand across the back of each one. "I copied every doc you wrote against me, and then I did what I do. I looked at all of it together, not just mine, the whole staff. 14 months of your breakage sheets." She laid the slips on the steel lip of the sink, the way another person might lay down a winning hand. "Breakage in a kitchen is random," she said. "Random has a shape. It clusters. It scatters. It averages out. Yours doesn't. Yours spikes on the exact weeks a worker questions a schedule or asks about a visa or gets close to what they're owed. Daegu recovered 400,000 won in March. Her breakage tripled in April. Mine doubled the week a stranger asked you what my rate was. That's not accidents. That's a ledger written backward from the number you wanted." She looked up at the camera, not away from it. Her composure was the whole weapon, and she held it level. "I turned down a scholarship at 18 to sit with a dying man," she said. "So I never got to use this for anything but order slips. But the math doesn't care where you learned it. Your losses aren't losses. They're wages, moved from one column to another, so the theft has a name that sounds like carelessness. I can show it line by line. The pattern only works if the people it's done to can't count. You hired people you believed couldn't count." Across the room, Hyung Won-gyeon stood at the edge of the felt, and he had not moved, and he did not move now. He could have ended it in a sentence. Nia knew that. Everyone in the room who understood who he was knew that. One quiet line about Owen's partners, about the ground already moving under the man, about what his family did to people who embarrassed the tables they backed, and Owen Warren would have been finished in a way that had nothing to do with proper channels and everything to do with fear. Nia felt the offer of it in the room like a temperature. He was waiting to see if she wanted rescuing. She did not look at him. She looked at Owen, and she made the choice that was the only thing in 14 months she had chosen entirely for herself. "I'm not going to let him bury you," she said. And she said it to Owen, but it was for the man at the felt, and he understood, because understanding was the thing he did. "I know who's in this room. I know what one phone call from the right person would do to you. That would be easy, and it would be his, and it would make me the thing I've been for 14 months, something other people do things with." She gathered the slips into a square, so here's what happens instead. These go to the labor office. Every sheet, every worker, the whole pattern, filed by someone who can prove it, through a door that stays open after the cameras leave. You don't get to be ruined by a rumor. You get to be answered. On paper. In front of people whose job it is to read it. She let that land. I want it done right. I want it to hold. A rumor you survive. A record follows you into every room you walk into for the rest of your life. Owen's smile had come off. The feed was still running. The powerful men at the table were watching him be counted out loud by a woman in wet sleeves, and there was no host voice for this, no warmth that fitted. And he understood, 30 floors up, in front of the audience he had built to admire him, that he had stood on the one person in the building who could read the whole board. "You're fired," he said. It was all he had left. "I quit 11 seconds ago," Nia said, "when I turned off the water." The man with the camera bag had turned the lens off Nia. It was on Owen now. The story had changed owners in real time, and the story knew it before Owen did. Hyun Won-gyeon crossed the floor then, unhurried, the way he did everything. He stopped 3 feet from her, the same distance as the first night, and he did not touch the slips, and he did not reach for the moment. He had watched her refuse the weapon he was holding, and whatever moved behind his eyes was the thing he had been circling since a Tuesday in October. "You could have used me," he said, low, under the noise of the room emptying itself of its certainty. "It would have been faster." "Faster isn't the same as mine," Nia said. He was quiet for the length of a breath she felt in her chest. "No," he said, "it isn't." He looked at the slips squared on the steel, the whole ruined ledger set down in her small exact hand, and then at the hands themselves, bare tonight, because she had stopped hiding them somewhere in the last 4 minutes and had not noticed the moment she did. "The labor office closes at 6, he said. "I know a man who will keep the door open past that, not to rescue you, to make sure the record holds, exactly the way you built it." A pause. "That is the only thing I will offer. You take it or you leave it on the table." Nia looked at him for a long moment, the quietest man in the loudest room she had ever stood in. Then she picked up the folded square of slips, and she turned it once in her fingers so the top sheet faced him. The false breakages and the true hours lined up in ink that would not wash out, and she held it there between them where the light could reach it. "Read it back to me," she said. "Every number. I want to hear it out loud once, before it belongs to someone else." He read it back to her. He stood 3 feet away in a room that was still emptying of its certainty, and he read the numbers of the top slip in his careful, exact English, and Nia watched him do the thing he had spent a lifetime refusing to do in front of anyone. He read slowly. He read a word out of order and stopped and found it again. He did not pretend the paper was easy. He simply read it. 90,000 won, 400,000 won, the false breakages and the true hours, one figure at a time, until the whole ledger had been spoken out loud once between them. She understood what it cost him. She had a wall like it herself. "You read that in front of me," she said, when he reached the last number. "You laid your hands on the sink in front of a camera," he said. It seemed fair. That was as close as either of them came to naming it. The labor office kept its door open past 6. The man he knew was real, and the door was real, and Nia walked through it with the slips squared in her ruined hand and filed the record the way she had built it, line by line, in front of people whose job it was to read. It held. It would go on holding. Owen Warren kept his 3 restaurants and his warm host voice and his name, and he kept them the way a man keeps a coat with a hole burned through it, whispered about now at the very tables where he had once done the whispering, answered on paper in every room he tried to enter. That was the justice she had chosen. Felt, not total, hers. They did not fall into anything that night. Men like him and women like her did not fall. They arrived slowly, over weeks, over an autumn that turned toward winter 30 floors above a city neither of them had planned to stay in. One held pause and one untouched glass at a time. He learned the way she dried the glasses before the plates. She learned the edges of a life she had only ever half seen, the card patterns held by ear, the ledgers memorized because the paper was a wall. Neither of them said the word for it. They did not need to. They had both spent their lives keeping the safe thing hidden, and now there was one person who knew it was there. She had learned that the quietest person in the room was usually the one holding the most. She had learned that a wall could keep a thing safe and keep it starving at the same time. She had learned that being seen was not the same as being rescued, and that she would take the first every day and hand back the second, because the first was hers and the second was only ever borrowed. She kept one order slip, not the ledger, that belonged to the record now. A single blank slip, the kind she had done 100 people's taxes on in the margins of, and on the back of it, in his careful hand, he had copied out the last figure he read to her that night, and under it 4 words. Read to you first. She kept it in the lining of her coat, where the arithmetic used to live. If this story meant something to you, drop a comment and tell me which moment hit you the hardest. The 11 seconds he watched before he spoke, or the moment she turned off the water and chose the paper over the phone call. It genuinely means something to know this reached the right person. If you are new here, subscribe and turn on notifications, and I promise the next story will be even harder to walk away from. Thank you for watching until the very end. I will see you in the next one.